Your mother wasn't a big fan of the Adventures of Jesus or anything like that.
I think she'd have been okay with that because she went to church, but she didn't mind things being a little bit sacrilegious. So I don't think that would have.
Okay.
What an awesome mom! What? That's so
Yeah,
cool. Your
it would have
mom's
been
so
more the explicit sex and the drug use in some of the underground comics that
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's probably good parenting right there. Yeah.
So before we get too far into things, I kind of wanted to just give people who may or may not know Randy or seen anything he's done before, just kind of give them a layout of, some of your history with comics and how you came to be a professor of comic studies in Arkansas, of all places.
Yeah, right.
Well, the reason I'm in Arkansas is because I was in Vermont and it was too darn cold. So I came south. But I probably read my first comic book in 1966, about 8 years old. And there was a convenience store nearby called Time Saver. I grew up in New Orleans in the Ninth Ward, and they would have these coverless comic books. I didn't know then that that retailers were supposed to tear off the cover and send that back in and then throw away the comics. But some people would tear off the cover, send it in to get the credit. They got kind of a refund for what they didn't sell, and then they sold them for 5 cents. And so as an 8-year-old, it was like, cool, something I can afford. So I think it was a cover starring the Legion of Superheroes, and that was written at the time by a 13-year-old Jim Shooter. So I really connected with him. It wasn't very sophisticated, but it was pretty sophisticated for an 8-year-old. To jump ahead, I'm at LSU, and I'm in the PhD program there. And I guess I should say that I was really lucky in that comics grew up at the same time I did. Because if you think about it, we're starting to get more serious work in the 70s, when I'm going to be in my later teens. And I discovered things like Will Eisner's Spirit from the past. And then in the 80s, if you hadn't been reading Raw, the comics anthology in which Mouse was serialized, then suddenly you saw the collected Mouse. There was The Dark Knight Returns, there was Watchmen. Will Eisner was doing graphic novels. And so by the time I'm in college and I wanted something a little more sophisticated, comics are giving me that. Because, early 80s, we get Alan Moore, Steve Bissett's Swamp Thing, and then that leads into Vertigo, et cetera, et cetera. So I never had to give up reading comics because I didn't outgrow them. They just grew along with me. And
that is an incredible timeline to grow during.
Yeah.
It's funny because that's what Neil Gaiman mentioned, that Swamp Thing is what got him back into that as well when he came to our school and did a talk. That run of Swamp Thing is what pulled him in. And made
it was
him
just
be
noticeably
like that.
different, than anything else. And it's kind of cool now that Steve Bissett was the artist for most of that, and we have the Stephen Bissett collection here at Henderson, and then he has donated
cool.
his original artwork and stuff related to his business and whatnot. But I'll mention that later. But so anyway, I'm working on the PhD, and I'm still reading comics. And I did a paper for a film class in which I looked at Frank Miller's Daredevil and how it was cinematic. And I turned in something about 5 times longer than the requirement. And so the professor said, and he didn't know anything about comics. He said, "Randy, you seem to be really into this stuff. Have you considered this as a dissertation topic?" And I said, "You can't do that, can you? You can't do a dissertation on comic books, can you?" And I was in a rhetoric program, at LSU, in the communication version of rhetoric rather than the English version. And so I ended up doing a doctoral dissertation on the rhetoric of comic book form, which I finished in 1990. And so, with academics, the dissertation kind of sets you on a path, except I was on a path that didn't exist. It was just, a forest that people hadn't hacked through much yet. Few people like Tom Inge had written a little bit about comics, but I was young and stupid, and I thought, well, I'll do that. And it was kind of good that I ended up at Henderson eventually, because we're a teaching institution, and we don't have that pressure to publish, and there wasn't much of any place to publish comics research at that time. So I would present at conventions like the Popular Culture Association convention or whatnot. And then probably 91, I should find out the exact date of this, I taught under special topics, comics as communication. And I could do that because I became department chair at a pretty young age. And I gave myself permission as department chair to teach that course.
Nice.
So again, it was just things were kind of falling into place for me, being born at the right time, having a professor who was kind of open-minded to something that most professors would have thought was just totally silly and not worth doing a dissertation on. And then, Henderson has been incredibly supportive. I mean, we have a really nice collection of graphic novels and most of the books of scholarship written about comics. So I'd say probably the best collection in the Mid-South in the Huey Library at Henderson. And that kind of made it possible for me to teach those courses. That was a long answer to something about it.
Oh,
no, great.
That was great. No,
That's perfect, because, I was just wondering, I was like, no, thinking about the time you had to have grown up, I'm like, who was taking comics seriously enough to let you do that? Like, did you have an inheritance and you paid like Henderson off to let you do it? I couldn't, but it does sound like things really from your time period of reading. So you had a really good history of just different kinds of comics, from the wholesome Legion of Superheroes and then through the 80s with Swamp Thing and Watchmen. Like, it's, what an incredibly blessed life.
Yeah. And there was the alternative comics movement. I kind of missed out on underground comics because I was still a little too young at the time they came out. And my mother kind of monitored my reading, and she decided comics were okay, and she noticed I was getting a better vocabulary from them. But she would not have approved of Zap Comics or or anything from Rip Off Press or
Your mother wasn't a big fan of the Adventures of Jesus or anything like that.
I think she'd have been okay with that, because she went to church, but she didn't mind things being a little bit sacrilegious. So I don't think that would have.
Awesome mom. What? That's so cool.
It would have been more the explicit sex and the drug use in some of the underground comics that
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's probably good parenting right there. Yeah.